Glumaz. Today is the 30th of October. We are one day from the most celebrated holiday in America, Halloween. At least maybe it's not so celebrated today, since everybody's been spooked by the financial situation. We know the bankers aren't celebrating Halloween because they're really spooked. Uh, what's been going on with the banking system is really interesting, or not so interesting, or scary, or maybe people just don't want to even think about it. But every day, the banks at the end of the banking day have to. The Federal Reserve has to do what they call an overnight lending, which is make available credit to banks in exchange for their worthless paper, to buy their worthless paper for a day in order to keep the interbank lending process going. The way the interbank lending process works, it's like all these banks have these hot potatoes they got to keep circulating, which are bad debts. Okay, and that's how they sell it to each other. They borrow money from each other at very low interest rates, and generally, it's the hot potatoes, keep the hot potatoes moving. And when the banks stop lending to each other, that's when the whole system collapses. Okay, so now the banks charge 2% interest rate or less for the interbank loans, which are on a nightly basis or daily basis, or something like that. And then what happens is when the interest rate on that goes up to like 10%, then there's a freeze going on because the banks don't want to make the loans, don't want to put the money in to buy all the stuff and keep it circulating. So then the Federal Reserve has to come in and provide the money to keep it going that way. And so on an average, they've been doing 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 billion dollars a day. And then they're doing also 2-week ones. So now they keep doing this. Now the total amount that they now have bailed out, or that they're holding in there, that they haven't sold back out, is somewhere on 400 billion. But I'm not clear on all these figures. But the point is that the system has a problem, and that it's not functioning. It needs grease every day, and the grease is the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is having to do this. Now, it either means that a hedge fund is in trouble and everybody's trying to privately bail this thing out, or a bank is in trouble, or major clients of the banks are in trouble. Okay, so it could be any of those things, but they're not telling you what it is, and they're not calling it quantitative easing, which is what they called it before. So all this is going on, and there's tremendous, shall we say, unease in the system. Okay, now, what the British aspect of this, or the international City of London aspect, or the 130 banks that are connected in with the whole system are trying to do, is they're trying to get people to accept dramatic cuts in living standards because there's no funds available in the system to be lending to the real economy. They want all the funds to go into this process of recirculating and refinancing and derivatives and hedge funds, speculation. So the amount of credit out there is massive, but it's not reflected in inflation because the physical economy is completely now separate from this huge gambling casino that has to be kept going. If the gambling casino collapses, then everything collapses. But the funds don't go into the real economy. The funds go into the gambling casino, and they're trying to suck as much out as they can to keep the gambling casino going. So there's no funds for infrastructure. There's no funds. There's no funds. It doesn't exist for the population. So now, the way they're trying to convince people that it's okay, one of the ways is this Green New Deal, or shall we say the climate change, the climate emergency. Because what they're saying is that investing in industry is creating a carbon problem. Therefore, you shouldn't invest in industry. You should invest in green technologies. But green technologies have no economic beneficial effect. Therefore, the green technology is still in the bubble system. It's not in the real economy. It is in the real economy, except that it's a drain on the real economy. So this situation is, they call this behavioral economics. This is behavioral economics, where, let's say, you put a tax on gas, or you put a tax on electricity, to deal with the carbon emissions. Well, that decreases the consumption of the electricity and increases the stress on the population. And then you say to them, well, it's because of the climate. We have to do this because of the climate emergency. It's called nudging. And the guy who wrote a book on nudging is the husband of Samantha Powers, and was one of the key Obama people. Was his name escapes me.
Cass Sunstein.
Cass Sunstein. There you go. So how do you get people to accept more and more austerity, more and more shitty living conditions? How do you do that? You do what's called nudging, and this is one form of nudging. So what they want to do, what City of London wants to do, what Carney proposed, is that when the collapse occurs, they want to say, okay, we can solve it. Okay, we can save you, but it's going to cost you. Okay, you're going to have more austerity, but we're going to go out of the dollar, and we're going to set up a central bank run system with cryptocurrencies created for the central bank to run things. And by the way, the government of every country has to abide by having their expenditures okayed by the central bank, whether it's the proper expenditures or not. Because now they want to take the entire budget of every country, or let's say the United States, and have it, and give the central bank, or in this case the Federal Reserve, the veto power over that particular budgetary item, from the standpoint of continuing the bailout, or continuing the system, or going into this new cryptocurrency system. This is called a banker's dictatorship. And that actually did occur in Germany in the late 30s under Helmut Schach, who was the banker's dictator. What he did is, the entire German economy was the looting machine for paying the MEFO bills. Just like the IMF conditionalities is the same thing. The entire third world country is organized on the basis of paying the debt that they don't really owe, but it's been bankers' arithmetic has created the debt. Corruption in bankers' arithmetic has created the debt, so they have to keep paying the debt. So everything they do, and they call it IMF conditionalities. Well, this is the same thing. It's the same thing for the United States. Now, it is probably not forever that this is going to continue. There will be a collapse. It looks like it's coming between now and sometime next year. And the problem they have is, there is an institution in the United States that has potentially the power to act against this. And that's a singular institution created by our founding fathers. It's called the institution of the U.S. President. See, and the person occupying the U.S. presidency is not a person that has love for this financial crowd or for the system. Now, when this occurs, the crisis occurs, the banking crisis occurs, everything's going to collapse, everything's going to evaporate. It's at that time that the only entity that can act is that which is sovereign. And a nation is sovereign. And if a sovereign nation has a leader who can act with full sovereignty and can act in full sovereignty with other sovereign nations, that's the issue. We're no longer under that system anymore, that global casino looting system. They looted Russia $1 trillion after the Soviet Union collapsed. They looted Eastern Europe $1 trillion in the same period. They looted Africa $1 trillion more. Okay, so this looting system created a world in which they had the world divided in this globalized system, where there was the entertainment, post-industrial consumer headquarters, so to speak, information center, which controlled this thing. And then you had the slave labor workshops of the world producing for nothing and marketing it and making and then creating this paper profit going back into the gambling casino. And then you had the raw material areas. And the idea is you don't want any government having control over those raw materials, because they might use the revenue from the raw materials to for their nation rather than, etc. So you want to keep those areas weak or broken up, like the Middle East. So in that situation, this is the world that they want to have. And also, if you have a country like Mexico, you don't want it to be sovereign. You want the drug lords to be in charge. That's a much more efficient way. That brings the drugs into the United States, and they may not necessarily be from Mexico, but they come through and then the guns come south to arm the drug cartels in Mexico, and that drug cartels become the dual power in Mexico, and the corruption works very well, and the money flows from the drugs, and everything's fine, everything's wonderful, and that's what is now Trump is now going after. So that's why they don't want Trump in there, because if he's president and you have this collapse, and he has ended the endless wars, policy, then he can talk to these other countries like Russia, China, India, Japan, and say, hey, let's do something about this mess. And what is there to do? Well, there's Lyndon LaRouche's New Bretton Woods, new fixed exchange system. There's Glass-Steagall to prevent the banks from looting the commercial part of the economy. There's infrastructure. There's state credit. There's public credit like FDR and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation or Lincoln's greenbacks. There's ways to unleash the productive power of the United States in that context and to increase trade. And there's some aspects of the potential of the China-U.S. trade deal that have that potential to create that kind of relationship between China and the United States. Yes, China became the slave labor sweatshop of the world, but they're moving out of that. Did the U.S. suffer because of that? Yes. But China is looking for we agree with you that is a problem, and Trump agrees. Trump's not blaming the Chinese. He's blaming the international financial people, the multinational corporate companies, the U.S. leadership. But what system do you go to? And that's the issue in the China-U.S. trade negotiations, which they were supposed to sign at the APEC Summit in Santiago, Chile, in 2 weeks. But guess what? the austerity of the Chilean model on the Chilean population run by the financial system has caused these riots, and the situation is out of control, and the APEC Summit was canceled today. Can you imagine that? So what you're seeing right now starting to occur all over the world, massive responses from the population to the economic austerity, whether it's in Lebanon, mass demonstrations, Iraq, mass demonstrations, France, continuing mass demonstrations, Italy, there was an election in the province of Umbria, which is a leftist province, and the right-center coalition cleaned up because the leftists have gone green, and they've abandoned the working class, they've abandoned the population. And Salvini is a leader who is of the Lega Nord, does understand what we're talking about, and a lot of his people that he works with talk to us, and they do know what they have to do in the financial collapse. They do know about Glass-Steagall. They do know about that. And then you have the specter, under the specter of the Brexit, which is being kicked down the road. You have Boris Johnson, this right-winger, allegedly, now making a big pitch to get the vote of the poorest in the country, promoting welfare relief and nationalization of the transportation industry. So he's going with a full labor, what would have been a Labor Party policy as a conservative in order to win the next election or come out on top. So what that says is that they're recognizing this mood in the population. And this mood isn't going to go away. And it's going to get worse. And there will be. You're looking at a political explosion everywhere in the world where the neoliberal financial system is in place. And yes, the enemy is trying to shift that ferment into a green, save the planet, save the trees, save whatever, right? That's the orientation. They want to deflect it, or they want to deflect it into an anti-China thing. China's the problem. China caused the problem. Let's go after China. China's in bed with the international bankers. Blah 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 blah. Which is like what comes out of people like Steve Bannon and what's his name? The fat guy. What's his name?
Alex Jones.
Alex Jones. Yeah, Alex Jones. So so that's what's going on. So, however, as we speak, you're seeing the disintegration of parts of the U.S. economy, like California. They've done nothing to maintain the power grids for 40 years. California was a very developed part of the United States 40 years ago, but they didn't maintain it. And now in the winds, the power lines are falling and triggering forest fires, and now you have to have blackouts and the states of emergency and so on and so forth. But it's not climate change which is causing that. It's human neglect of infrastructure, neglect of all of our infrastructure has been neglected on a massive scale. So, as we go into this crisis, we're sitting on an explosion, potential explosion. And tomorrow, the Democratic caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives is going to try to pass a formal impeachment inquiry, and they'll design the rules and everything. It'll be totally a fraud, total fraud, but they were forced to do that. But what's important about that is that the lid is going to be coming off on the criminal conspiracy to remove this president, which is going to implicate Clapper, Obama, all the so-called people, plus many more. And the whole Ukrainian situation is tied into it, which is why they picked the Ukraine, because they're trying to create as much smoke around the Ukrainian discussion that Trump had with the president, because the Ukrainian situation is where it all intersects. In the coup that took place in 2014, that's where it all intersects. or 2013, man, not 2014. That's what it all intersects. The Nazis, the financing of the Nazis, the criminal oligarchs that backed these Nazis, the takeover, and the role of McCain, the role of Victoria Nuland, the role of the U.S. government in the Color Revolution, which the Russians and the Chinese see as a form of direct warfare. So that whole thing has a can of worms, and it ties completely into the same apparatus that's trying to remove the president. It also ties into the same apparatus in Brazil that removed Lula through corruption. But it was the U.S. Justice Department which played a key role in Brazil in setting up Lula and Dilma Rousseff. So there is going to be, when all of this starts to crack open, there is going to be an explosion in all these areas. There's going to be an explosion in the U.S. And we're sitting on a volcano. And the population is probably not going to blame Trump. Okay. The population is going to blame the people that are going after Trump. So that's the explosion that we're looking at. And so while this APEC Summit was very important because it was where Donald Trump and Xi Jinping of China were going to sign the trade agreement, was also going to be a place where Putin, Xi, and Trump were going to talk about things. That's not going to happen. Okay. So how that all relates is another issue. But we are entering a very explosive period. And the institutions that do not have relevance to the continued survival of their populations are going to go. And either there's going to be chaos or new institutions will emerge that do have relevance. And again, LaRouche's 4 laws are very important in this respect because those are the economic policies any and every country must adopt for survival. Public credit, separation of banks between investment and commercial, so you protect your commercial sector, and an ability to trade with other nations without being gouged by the international speculators, which is a fixed exchange system. So this is where we're headed. We're headed in that direction, and we're in this. This is economic warfare. This is information warfare against the population to try to nudge them, distract them, get them away from anything real. And but we're headed into that period. And so that is why they have to remove Donald Trump now. They cannot wait to remove Donald Trump till after Christmas or after New Year's, because by the time February comes around, January comes around, you're already in the primaries. You're already in the primaries. You're in an election mode. You're in an election process. Try to impeach somebody in the middle of an election process. Does that make any sense to you? Does that make any sense? Well, they will try to continue, but that's what they're trying to do because they have to get rid of Trump. It's existential. And the Democratic Party is a mess. These people are, totally, except for the one person that's different, which is Tulsi Gabbard. They're a total mess, and she's green, so I have an issue with that. But she's against the war operation, the war plan. But these people have lost it, and Elizabeth Warren is for the Green New Deal, which is to channel all this credit that FDR would have channeled into building up the country, if you were following FDR, into worthless green projects. I mean, that's slave labor, worthless slave labor projects, and she's totally opposed to nuclear power. The future is nuclear power. Future is fusion. Future is fission. That's what Putin did. He had a meeting in Sochi with all the heads of state of Africa, and what he's doing is setting up the ability for Russia to have the nuclear export market to Africa. That's how Russia is going to reindustrialize. They're going to reindustrialize by massive exporting of nuclear power plants to all these African countries so that they can have electricity to go with the infrastructure that China is helping them build. All right, that's Russia and nuclear power. Elizabeth Warren is totally opposed to nuclear power, as is all these other people. You know, there is literally no reality in these people. Okay, there is no sense of reality, but reality is coming in the form of a world, of a breakdown of the whole global system.
Common stock investments have helped to make our country prosperous and powerful. Owning a share in American industry is like owning a share in the future of our nation. But remember, John Q, there is a risk as well as an advantage in owning any kind of property. So get the facts before you put your money to work.